The Bible doesn't tell us a whole lot about Jesus' childhood, but it does tell us quite a few things. For instance, at 8 days old, Jesus was circumcised according to the custom of Moses, a reminder of God's covenant, God's promise. And he was named. And as it had been decided before he was ever born, he was named Jesus, which in Hebrew would be Joshua. And that Hebrew language means God saves. Sometime after this, when he was still very little, the Magi came. They were these magicians from the Far East, people who would watch the stars in the skies and try to interpret what was going on in the world. And they could see that God was doing something big, and they followed this alignment of the heavenly celestial objects of stars or planets or whatever they were. And they looked in Jerusalem, because if God is doing big things, it must be in the big places where all the powerful people are. But God wasn't working in the palace, wasn't in the place of power. They found God working in this little family in the middle of nowhere in Bethlehem. And those magi, being wise people, knew that they had found God's work, and they opened up these treasure chests and presented these gifts to Jesus and his family: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And to be honest, they were pretty weird gifts for a child. Gold was the kind of thing you'd give to a newborn king or prince. Frankincense is what you would give to a priest when he's ordained. That's what they use in their work in the temple. And myrrh, well, that's honestly for dead bodies. It's used for embalming. So it's a very, very odd gift. When Jesus was a little older, as was custom, they went to Jerusalem, and Jesus was presented to the Lord. And they offered a small sacrifice. There, a man named Simeon was a righteous man. He'd been promised by the Spirit that he would see the Messiah before he died. And as soon as he saw Jesus, he wanted to wrap him in his arms. And he said, "Oh, now I can die happy." Because for him, hope was not just something that happened to him. Hope was that knowing that his family and his people would be well, that God was there and taking care of them. Also in the temple was the prophet Anna, and she recognized Jesus as well and shared her joy and acknowledgement that God was doing something in this baby. But ever since those wise men passed through Jerusalem, Herod, who was the ruler of this area, started looking for the child. He was threatened. If God was doing something big, he wanted to know what it was, and he wanted to make sure that he was on top of whatever was happening. And no one really helped him, and so he made a plan to just kill all the babies in Israel. Fortunately, God had warned Joseph in a dream, and they fled, they ran. And Jesus, not even a year old, became a refugee in Egypt. Later on, they returned to Nazareth, and they settled there, and Joseph was a carpenter there, a home builder. And Jesus, he grew in strength and wisdom. I don't think he did magic tricks for his friends or anything like that. I really honestly think Jesus experienced the fullness of childhood, all of the good and the bad, the curiosity and exploring and playing and learning love from his parents, as well as the bad, the challenges, the bullies, the colds, and all those things that we all deal with, skin knees as children. Because after all, that angel had told Joseph that he would be called Emmanuel, God with us. By the time Jesus was 12 years old, they went up to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover, as their family would every year, and they traveled in a big group with relatives and friends. And when they left Jerusalem to go back home, His parents just assumed he was with the cousins or the second cousins, running around, but they didn't realize until a couple days journey home that he wasn't with them. Panicked, they went back to Jerusalem. They looked for him for 3 days, high and low, until they finally found him in the temple, sitting neatly Indian style in front of the rabbis, learning from those teachers, asking them questions. I mean, everybody who was there was amazed at the things that Jesus understood and even the ways that he saw things. His parents were definitely upset with him, and Jesus said, well, duh. He's 12. He's a teenager. Well, duh, I'm in my Father's house. And they didn't really get it at the time, but Mary pondered all of these things in her heart, and the pieces kind of came together as Jesus grew older. Sometime between 12 and 30, we think Joseph, Jesus' dad, probably died. It's not written there in the Bible, but he never appears in the story again. I think it's a reminder to us that even God knows loss. Because in Jesus, God came to know the fullness of humanity. And so Jesus spent the first 30 years of his life not teaching and preaching and doing miracles, gaining followers. He spent that time living with us, as us, experiencing it all.